And now it's time for our second installment of How to Eat Fried Worms by Thomas Rockwell. It's a AR level 3.5. It's a 2-point book. AR test number 174 can be taken after listening to and reading along with the whole book. Remember, these are read alongs, not read alouds. The words are on the screen so you can read with me. Chapter 8, The Third Worm. Tom ran out of the kitchen of Billy's house, holding the sizzling frying pan out in front of him with both hands, the screen door banging behind him. Alan threw open the barn door when he saw him coming. Tom thumped the frying pan down on the orange crate. "There," he said breathlessly. "Done to a T. Look at her, all golden brown and sizzling. It looks good enough to eat." "Yeah," said Billy. He poked the worm with a fork. Tom took off the pot-holder glove he was wearing. "Think fish," he said. "Remember, think fish. Salmon, flounder, salmon, trout, salmon, flounder, perch. I'll ride my mini bike into church. Eel, salmon, bluegill, trout. Wait till you hear the ministers shout. Clam, flounder, tuna, sucker. Look out, here we come, old Mrs. Tucker. Lobster, black bass, oyster stew. There goes New Orleans. Here comes Peru." He leaned over Billy and whispered in his ear, "Fish, fish, 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 fish. Okay, go on, take a bite. Fish, 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 fish. Okay, second bite. Fish, 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 fish." Chapter 9, The Plotters. "Geez, you think it'll work?" said Alan to Joe. "Suppose it doesn't. He didn't seem to pay much attention today." "Don't worry," said Joe. "We got him thinking. It takes time. I got it all doped out. Trust me." Chapter 10, The Fourth Worm. Billy ate steadily, grimacing, rubbing his nose, spreading on more horseradish sauce. Tom bent over him, hissing in his ear, "Fish, fish, 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 fish." Billy paused, watching Alan and Joe whispering by the door. He swished the last bite round and round in the ketchup and mustard. All of a sudden he said, "That's not fair. They can't act like that anymore. Every time I swallow, they lean forward as if they expect me to keel over or something. And then when I don't, they look surprised and shrug their shoulders and nudge each other." "Come on," said Joe. "Cut it out. We can watch you for cripe's sake. We're just standing over here by the window watching you." "No, you're not," said Billy. "You're whispering and acting as if you expect something to happen every time I swallow." "It's nothing," said Joe. "Forget it. Look, we'll turn around and look out the window while you swallow." "What do you mean it's nothing?" said Billy. "What's nothing?" "Oh, come on," said Alan. "It's just something Joe's father told him the other night. It's nothing." "What? What?" "It'll just worry you," Alan said. "It's crazy. It's nothing. Forget it." Billy tore the napkin away from his throat. "Tell me." "It's nothing," said Joe. "You know how my father is. He's always yelling about something." "Tell me or it's all off." "Well, look, it's nothing. But the night before last, I was telling Janie about you eating the worms, and my father was on the porch and he heard us. So he threw down his newspaper and he says, 'Joseph!' I says, 'Yes, Pa?' And he says, 'Have you ate a worm, Joseph?' And then he grabbed my shoulders and shook me till my hands danced at the end of my arms like a puppet's. 'It's for your own good,' he says. So I stuttered out, 'It's not going to do me any good if I shake to pieces, is it?' Janie was wailing. My mother was chewing her apron in the doorway. 'Alfred,' she cries, 'what's he done?' 'You'll deracinate him.' 'Has he hauled down the American flag at school and eaten it again? Has he?' 'So what's the point?' yelled Billy. 'Get to the point. What's it all have to do with me?' 'I'm coming to it,' said Joe, wiping his nose, 'but I wanted to show you how important it was. My father nearly killing me and all.' He sneezed, and then Alan began to sneeze, and finally had to hobble off into one of the horse stalls, hugging his stomach to recover. Anyway, says Joe, wiping his nose again and hitching up his Levi's. So, my father told my mother he thought I'd eaten a worm. A what? Says my mother, dropping her apron and clutching the sides of her head. A worm, says my father, nodding solemnly. So my mother fainted, collapsed all helter-skelter right there in the doorway and lay still, her tongue lolling out of her mouth, her red hair spread out beautifully over the doorsill. So will you cut it out? Billy yelled. Who cares about your mother? What does it have to do with me? I think he's lying, said Tom. Who ever heard of someone's mother fainting with her tongue hanging out? All right, yelled Joe apoplectically, stamping around. All right, now I won't tell you. You can die, Billy Forrester, and you'll have to carry him home, Tom Grout, all by yourself. Nobody says to me, who cares about your mother? All right, I'm going. Alan, he yelled, they're insulting my mother. I'm going. Don't, said Alan, running out of the horse stall and grabbing Joe by the shirt toes. Don't. You got to tell him. Even your mother said so. Mine too, no matter what he said. Ain't it a matter of life and death? I won't, said Joe, starting for the door. Alan pulled him back. You got to. How long have we known poor Bill? 6, 7 years? For old time's sake, Joe, because we were all once in kindergarten together. Think of the agony he'll face, Joe, the pain and the blood and the gore. Billy was on his knees by the orange crate, wringing his hands, not daring to interfere, but when Joe glanced sullenly back at him, he whispered, Please, Joe, for old time's sake. Well, will you apologize for insulting my mother? I do, said Billy. I do. I apologize. So Alan and Joe began to sneeze again, and this time had to bend over and put their heads between their legs to recover. Tom, who was watching them suspiciously, trying to make out what was going on, started to say something. Shut up, hissed Billy fiercely, turning on him. You keep out of it. So Joe went on with his story, how his mother had been carried up to her room, how the doctor had come, shaking his head, how his aunt had sobbed, pulling down all the shades in their house, how that morning his mother had finally come downstairs for the first time on learning his aunt's arm, pale and leaning on his aunt's arm, pale and sorrowful. Yeah, said Tom, sure. So why? What does eating worms do to you? Nobody'll tell me, said Joe, opening his eyes wide. It's been 3 days now, and nobody'll say. It's just like the time my cousin Lucy got caught in the back seat of her father's Chevrolet with the encyclopedia salesman. Nobody'll tell me why there was such an uproar. He wiped his mouth. But one thing's for sure. It's worse than poison. Probably. Crap, says Joe. Oh, said Tom. Oh, yeah, says Joe. But then he and Alan had another sneezing fit, sprawling helplessly against each other. Look at them, said Tom and Billy. They're not sneezing, they're laughing. Come on, eat the last piece and let's get out of here. You really think so? Bill said doubtfully. The sneezing did look an awful lot like giggling. Sure, look at them. Tom gave Alan and Joe a shove. They collapsed in a heap, sneezing uncontrollably. Billy watched them. Yeah, sure, they weren't sneezing. They were laughing, weren't they? Hay fever, gasped Alan. Hay fever. You never had hay fever before, said Tom. How about yesterday or the day before? Come on, Billy, open up. So Billy, half believing Tom and half not, glancing doubtfully at Alan and Joe, allowed Tom to poke the last bit of worm into his mouth and lead him out of the barn. Alan and Joe sat up. It didn't work, said Alan. Joe began brushing the chaff out of his hair. You wait. He wasn't sure. Tom was, but he isn't eating the worms. You wait. Billy's worried. He was before. That's why he said he felt like he was going to throw up. But now he's really worried. Suppose I wasn't lying. Did you see his face when I said my father shook me? I thought his eyes would bug right out of his head. Alan laughed. Oh, geez, yeah. And when you said your mother fainted? Joe stopped brushing the chaff out of his hair. Except, why'd you laugh so much, for cripe's sake? If you'd kept a straight face, even Tom wouldn't have guessed. Aw, you laughed first. What do you mean? Me? I laughed first? I did not. You did so. You laughed when he yelled at you the first time, and you wiped your nose. They went off through the meadow, arguing. Chapter 9. Tom. Billy pushed the frying pan toward Tom. Okay, Fink, if it's not supposed to hurt you, you eat a piece. Oh, no, said Alan. He and Joe were lying on their stomachs in the hayloft watching. If he eats a piece, you lose, Billy. The bet was you were going to eat 15 worms, not you and him together. Billy didn't look up, his eyes fixed grimly on Tom. All right, then I'll go dig another worm just for him. He's so big, telling me, hurry up, hurry up. I can't wait around all day. Don't be a sissy. All right now. I didn't say sissy, said Tom uncomfortably. I just said if the first 4 worms didn't kill you, this one wouldn't. I can't help it if my mother told me to be home by 2 today. She's going shopping, so I have to mind my brother. Yeah, said Billy. Okay, so we'll just have time for you to eat a worm before you go. Come on, where's the shovel? Here, said Alan from the loft. We brung an extra today. A worm dangled, squirming from his fingers. He dropped it to Billy. It's not cooked, said Tom. I'll do it, said Joe, scrambling down the ladder. He took the worm from Billy and ran out. Then he ran back and grabbed the frying pan. Tom sat down on the overturned pail to wait. He didn't want to eat any worm. It wasn't his bet. He glanced at the door creaking in the wind. Maybe he should make a break for it. Of course, he could see Billy's point. Billy didn't believe Joe's story, but still, he'd find it reassuring if Tom ate some worm too. He'll eat it, Billy was saying to Alan. If he don't, he's chicken, said Alan, after all his talk. Why don't I eat it, thought Tom. I mean, it's a yucky thing to do, but it wouldn't kill me. He scratched his neck, shifting his seat on the pail. I don't know, thought Tom. I just won't, I guess. He gagged, imagining what it would be like to bite down on a fat, boiled worm. He glanced at the door again. Billy kicked the door shut. Leave it open, said Tom. Why? Because I said so. Yeah? Well, you don't own this barn. Neither do you. It's your father's. Billy rubbed his nose, watching Tom, figuring he's trying to pick a fight so he won't have to eat the worm. Okay. Billy opened the door and set a brick against it. Tom shifted in his seat on the pail again. He couldn't stop thinking about what it would be like to bite down on a soft, fat, boiled worm. He scratched his ear. Who did Billy think he was, trying to order people around, telling them that they had to eat and all? What they had to eat and all. Billy wasn't anybody's father. Tom began to feel put upon and indignant and stubborn. The screen door slammed. Joe coming back with the worm. Tom licked his lips. He heard Joe running across the barnyard toward them. Billy! Alan shouted. Billy spun around just in time to catch a glimpse of Tom pelting out the door banging shut. He flung to the window. Joe sprawled in the middle of the barnyard on his back. Tom was clambering over the wall into the meadow. The frying pan lay upside down beside the horse trough. Chapter 12. The Fifth Worm. Look, said Billy to himself, staring down at the fried worm on the plate. Be sensible. How can it hurt me? I've eaten 4 already. Tom was just scared. He's like that. He eggs other people on, but he never wants to do anything himself. Give up? Asked Alan. Come on, said Joe. We haven't got all day. 5 more minutes, said Alan. Then I win. There's no time limit, said Billy. For the first time, he wondered what he'd do if he lost. Where could he ever get $50? But how could he eat 10 more big, fat, ugly, soft, brown things? He couldn't ask his father for $50. He heard Alan and Joe whispering together. He's going to quit. Yeah, I knew he'd never make it when I bet with him. He talks big. Him and Tom are just the same, but they never do anything. Billy gritted his teeth, glopped on mustard, ketchup, salt, grated cheese, whatever was on the crate, anything, everything. Then he grabbed up the worm and tore it apart with his hands, stuffing it into his mouth, chewing and swallowing, gulping. Then, panting, he reached out with his and wiped his gooey hands on Alan's trousers and grinned messily up at him and said, There, 5. What is going on with this book? Chapter 13. Nothing to worry about. That night, Alan asked his father to show him $50. After that, he couldn't sleep. tossing and turning in his rumpled bed. Suppose he lost. He could just see himself asking his father $50, begging for it on his hands and knees, tears streaming down his cheek. And then, at Thanksgiving dinner, cringing while all his aunts and uncles and cousins roared over his father's story about Alan's bet. He slid out of bed and snuck down the carpeted hall to his parents' bedroom. "You gotta wake him up, Mrs. O'Hara, you got to," he whispered into the phone. "It's an emergency. I got to speak to him." Pause. "I got a hoarse throat, Mrs. O'Hara. That's why I'm whispering. Please." Pause. "Gee, thanks, Mrs. O'Hara. No, I won't ever call this late again. It's. He waited, gnawing on his thumbnail. A board creaked on the stairs. He stiffened. Silence. "Geez, I was sleeping. You woke me up." "Joe, suppose I lose. My father will never let me take the money out of my savings account. I know he won't. You think I'll lose, Joe? Huh? Huh, Joe? Tell me. Give it to me straight, Joe. I gotta know. I can't sleep." Joe sighed. "Look, I told you this afternoon. You got nothing to worry about. He's cracking. Sure, he ate that one today. Sure, he might." Chapter 14. The Pain and the Blood and the Gore. 4 blocks away, Billy suddenly found himself in a brightly lit butcher shop, jostled by a crowd of enormous, pigeon-breasted, middle-aged women shouting to make himself heard over the din of their chatter and the roar of butchers ordering about the weasel-faced boys that were lugging haunches and tubs of meat in and out of the refrigerator room at the rear. Then a butcher saw Billy jumping and jumping among the women and asked for his order, and Billy gave it. And suddenly he was shoved up close to the chopping block, and the butcher slapped down 10 black worms as big as snakes, and Billy tried to say they were too big. He'd choke on them, but the butcher couldn't hear him over the thumps of his cleaver and the din of the women and the hoarse shouts of the other butchers, and before Billy knew what was happening, he was seated at a table in Longchamp's restaurant on Times Square in New York City with a large napkin tied under his chin, and a waiter was uncovering a platter on which lay one of the huge black worms, coiled snakily, a red rose wobbling, in which lay one of the huge black worms, coiled snakily, a red rose wobbling in the center of its coil. "How can I ever finish it?" said Billy, and cut into the mammoth. "How can I ever finish it?" said Billy, and cut into a mammoth coil. Steaming pink juice flooded out. Billy ate and ate and ate, and then looked, and he must have eaten more than that. And then he looked again, and there was no hole at all. He'd eaten and eaten and eaten nothing at all. And then he felt something cold on his ankle and looked under the tablecloth, and there were 2 more of the huge worms wound round and round his ankle. And then he felt something weighing down on his arm. He looked, and there was another worm wound around his arm, glaring hungrily at him with its bloodshot red eyes. And from everywhere in the vast room, winding between tables, waiters approaching carrying huge silver serving platters. Billy opened his eyes. For the first moment, in the moonlight flooding his bedroom, his 2 bare feet sticking up out of the bottom of the covers looked like 2 huge white worms' heads. And then he realized that he had been dreaming and sank back onto his pillow, his nightmare melting away. There were no huge worms as big as pythons. He was home in bed. His parents were asleep in the next room. But suppose Joe hadn't been lying. The hair stood up on the back of his neck. Or suppose Joe had made it all up, but had been right anyway without knowing it. A shutter banged. Billy glanced out the window and saw the moon riding among the tossing leaves. His stomach rumbled and gurgled. He moaned. Suppose he was dying. He had heard of people waking up in the middle of the night with pains in their stomachs, and then, as the windows turned gray in the dawn, they died. Toadstools, soured lobster, tainted pork. Was that a pain? He clutched his stomach and groaning, half fell, half staggered out of the bedroom and hobbled toward the door, bent double. Maybe there was an antidote, he whimpered. It didn't hurt a lot, but nothing ever did to begin with, did it? Chapter 15. 3:15 a.m. Uh-oh. Looks like he's going to wake his parents. His mother reached out and switched on the light. What kind of pain, Billy? He stood beside the bed, clutching his stomach. In my stomach. Oh, there it goes again, I think. Did you eat something before bed? She was pulling on her bathrobe. John, John. She shook her husband's shoulder. He mumbled sleepily. Did you eat candy or something before bed, Billy? Worms, groaned Billy. Worms? John, Billy, what kind of worms? Regular worms, night crawlers. She felt his forehead, lifted his chin, and looked into his face. You don't have a temperature. How many worms did you eat? 5. 2 boiled and 3 flat fried, with ketchup, mustard, horseradish, salt, pepper, butter, to make them taste better. Fried? Ketchup? Taste better. John, wake up. I had this bet with Alan. Oh, he said, groaning again. Take your hands away. Where does it hurt now? Show me. It doesn't really hurt so much now. It's just rumbling and gurgling, something awful. Then why are you groaning? Asked his father, sitting up. Because I'm afraid it's going to start hurting. Do you think I'm going to die, Daddy? Billy nodded. And how many did you eat this evening? 1 this afternoon. I've eaten 1 every day for the last 5 days. But they weren't little ones. They were night crawlers, huge ones, as big as snakes almost. His father lay back down, pulling the covers up around his shoulders. Don't worry. Eating 1 night crawler a day for 6 weeks wouldn't hurt you. Go back to bed. It's probably all the ketchup and mustard that's upsetting your stomach. Drink a glass of warm water. John, are you sure? Said Billy's mother. It doesn't seem to me that worms could be a very healthy thing to eat. John? His father snuggled deeper under the covers. I didn't say eating worms would turn him into an all-American fullback. I just said they wouldn't hurt him. Now let's go to sleep. Billy's mother glanced at Billy, shivering beside the bed in bare feet and pajamas, and then shook her husband again. John, wake up. I think you should call Dr. McGrath. You don't really know whether or not eating worms is harmful. I know you don't. Billy's father groaned and sat up. Look. I am not going to call Dr. McGrath at 3:30 in the morning to ask if it's all right for my son to eat worms. That's flat. Secondly, I do know that Billy's not going to die before morning. If worms were poisonous, which they're not, he would have been laid up before this. Billy, you've been eating worms for 5 days? Billy nodded. All right. And thirdly, I ate a live crayfish when I was in college and have suffered no discernible ill effects. And fourthly, I am going to sleep. Billy's mother slipped her feet into her slippers, stood up and buttoned her bathrobe, and then leaned over the bed and shook her husband's shoulder. John, I won't be able to sleep until you call. John, what about tapeworms or a fungus? John, wake up. Billy, you go back to bed. Your father will call Dr. McGrath. John. Billy lay in his bed, listening to his mother and father arguing in their bedroom. He could only make out a word here and there, usually when his father started to shout, only to be shushed immediately by his mother. Billy got sleepier and sleepier. His stomach had stopped rumbling and gurgling. It was warm and cozy under the covers after standing on the cold floor in his bare feet. Then, in the midst of a foggy drowse, he heard someone dialing the phone in the hall outside his parents' bedroom. And then his father said, Poison control? And explained the case. Then there was silence. Billy heard the water running in the bathroom, and then his father said, You're sure? These weren't ill effects. His father laughed. A bet, I think. The next thing Billy knew, sunlight was streaming through his window, and Emily was skipping down the hall past his door. Half a pound of tuppenny rice, half a pound of treacle. That's the way the money goes. His father shouted down the stairs. Helen, do you know where my green tie with the red stripes is? Chapter 16. The Sixth Worm. Billy gulped triumphantly, serene, untroubled. By the door, Alan glowered, his mind racing. He's going to do it. He'll win. What'll I do? $50. Joe sat on an overturned pail, whistling, gazing carelessly about, sneaking a glance now and then at Billy. What had gone wrong? Why hadn't he cracked? Outside, Tom lurked sheepishly in the bushes behind the stone wall, peering at the barn. Chapter 17. The Seventh Worm. Billy ate it offhand, sideways, reading a comic book. Alan and Joe squatted glumly in the barn door, watching him. As Billy was daubing horseradish sauce on the last bite, Tom's head appeared in the corner of the grimy window. He waved tentatively at Billy. Ignoring him, Billy gulped down the last bite, wiped his mouth, tucking his comic book under his arm, strolled airily out of the barn, remarking over his shoulder, "See you tomorrow, fellas." Chapter 18. The Eighth Worm. "Where's Joe?" asked Billy, spreading mustard down the length of the fried worm. "He wouldn't come," said Alan sullenly. "It's no fair putting on that much mustard." "Ha ha," said Billy. "Who says who? I can put on as much as I like of whatever I like, and you know it. Why wouldn't he come?" "How should I know?" Billy swooshed the last bit of worm around in ketchup and horseradish sauce. "I know why he didn't." "Yeah, you're so smart? Big deal." Alan couldn't get the $50 out of his head. What was his father going to say when he told him he'd bet $50 and lost? Jeez, he gnawed at his thumbnail. He wouldn't come because he knows I've won. He knows I could eat 20 worms if I had to. Yeah, well, you ain't won yet. There's still 7 to go. You act so big. Wait till you begin to feel it in your stomach. You know how you think you know everything, yeah? You'll see. You wait. Ha ha, said Billy. You think you can scare me talking like that? Phooey. He strolled past Alan out into the sunlight. Hi, said Tom, popping up from behind the barrel. Pfft, said Billy disdainfully, and walked on. The Ninth Worm. That's not a worm, yelled Billy. How can it be a worm? Geez, it must be 2 feet long. It's a worm, said Alan. It's just like all the others. I rolled it in cornmeal and fried it. It's over 2 feet long. He knew something was up. Otherwise, Joe wouldn't have come back, slouching in the doorway, pretending to be gazing up at the clouds. But Billy noticed he kept glancing at Alan and him, and Tom was peering in the window again. Something was up. Look, said Alan. I'll cut it. You can see for yourself it's a worm. There. See? Come on. Eat up. We ain't got all day. Joe and me have to go to Shushan with his father. Billy poked at the huge worm with his fork. Something sure was up. He ate the piece Alan had cut, looking the rest of the worm over carefully as he chewed. He ate another bite. Pfah! He'd forgotten to dip it in horseradish sauce. Come on, said Alan. Yeah, said Joe. Eat up, Billy. We gotta go. I'll never be able to eat the whole thing, thought Billy. It'd choke me. It's too much yuck at once. Half, he croaked. I'll eat half. This is some sort of ringer. There's never been a worm this long. Okay, said Alan. Then the bet's off. Suit yourself. Come on, Joe. He chickened out. Let's go. All right, said Billy, playing for time. The whole thing. You'll make yourself sick, said Alan. He's too anxious, thought Billy. What's going on? Leave him alone, said Joe. Let him eat it. It's his stomach. He's trying to cover for Alan, thought Billy. He ate another bite, then began to scrape the cornmeal carefully off the worm with his knife. What are you doing? Said Alan. I think I'll have it plain today. No cornmeal. That's not fair. You can't. Glue! Screamed Billy all of a sudden. Glue! You glued 2 crawlers together. Jeez, you bunch of lousy cheats. Tom, look what they tried to pull. Glue! Panting, Tom bent over the plate. You're right. Jeez. Alan kicked a pail, clattering against a wall. I told you it wouldn't work, he screamed at Joe. All right, so it didn't work. You couldn't think of anything better. That's cheating, said Billy. I ought to win right now. You cheated. 15 worms in 15 days, yelled Joe. You ain't won yet, but you cheated. So what? They argued and yelled, striding here and there about the barn, sprawling against posts, flinging up their arms, kicking walls, banging down a pail of or orange crates and squeezing their heads between their hands. It doesn't make any difference, yelled Joe at Billy. It didn't work. You didn't fall for it. If you'd have eaten the whole thing and then found out it was two worms glued together, then you could have claimed a win because Alan was cheating. Big mouth, shouted Alan from up in the horse stall where he was kicking the slats in. Who thought it up? Not me. Who cares who thought it up? Shouted Tom. It's still cheating. A pig looked in at the door and then wandered away. Joe ran out and stuck his head under the faucet by the kitchen steps. A minute later, he came back dripping, yelling, That's not true. What's not true? Said Billy, turning around from shouting Alan. Whatever you said. What did I say? Doesn't make any difference. You're a liar and a cheat, so anything you say isn't true. You're crazy. Even Hitler or Jack the Ripper sometimes said things that were true. It's impossible to lie all the time. Behind them, Tom lay down on his back and said, Arg! Alan, Joe, and Billy turned to look at him. What's the matter with you? Arg! Arg? Arg! Silence. A bird flew in and then out through the broken window in the loft. Well, said Billy, yeah, I see what you mean. He and Alan and Joe sat down on the overturned orange crates. After a while, Joe said, Anyways, I was right. If Billy had eaten it, it would have been cheating, but he didn't, so it's not. The bet's still on. The pig looked in at the door again. A pig's loose, said Alan. Look. Where? Said Billy. Oh, boy, come on, we got to catch it. He jumped up. The pig bolted. Woo-wee, yelled Billy, dashing out. Tom and Joe and Alan scrambled after him. And that's the end of the second part of How to Eat Fried Worms by Thomas Rockwell.